I'm going to speak today about hacking the phone network. So, I'm sorry, I don't speak Spanish, no hablo español, but I can teach you French, though, in 2 words, if you want. Okay, French have the obnoxious attitude, usually, to answer anything by, when you ask a question, I don't know, and when you really want something from them, I don't care. So whenever you meet a French, is asking you something, you and then is continuing, like really requesting something from you, and you're French, basically. All right, so I'll go very quick because right now what we're going to do is hit a wall. Imagine you're going to have to learn TCP/IP again. Well, that's basically the case with Ss7. It's a complete set of new protocols, so it might be a bit steep at some point to follow all the new protocols and, let's say, all the new terminology that has to be introduced. Basically, why is there Ss7 and what is it? Well, Ss7, as you now know, is a telecom protocol that carries everything. So here, the people who actually use Ss7 can raise their hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe? Wow, great. It's unusual. Well, actually all of you should be raising their hand because as soon as you take your phone and actually make a call, you are using Ss7. And you are injecting data into Ss7. So I'll be explaining that very, very simply. But the thing is, why is there Ss7? Well, because of us, actually. Because lots of people, back in the days, were using the blue box. And the blue box was just people playing tones which were CCITT5 or C5 tones into the phone system. And what would happen is that the phone system in front, which were big computers, and which are still big computers, would actually be interpreting your C5 tones as if you were the phone network. So instead of receiving customer digits, you'd be receiving actually, well, the phone system would be receiving orders from what is supposed was another phone system. And that's what enables someone to, let's say, as a customer, dial a toll-free number, 0800 something, and then be connected for free, and then send pretending to be phone system tones, so C5 tones, and then be connected to another network. Because the phone system in front would be, oh, interesting. This is another central office talking to me, and it's asking me to redirect, let's say, this call to another thing. So it would not take care about billing, because the only first central office would take care of billing, and you would be connected for free. So fraud was going on at such a massive level that actually the telecom organization said, okay, we must get rid of these vulnerabilities. And they took the signaling between the central offices out of the band. That means that you would have the voice trunk going in, carrying your voice, basically communication, and the digit that you punched would be transmitted through another kind of carrier. So basically what we have here is a place where between the 2 SSPs on the left, you have the voice and the signaling that is going to be going through 2 different networks. And SSP are really the central office switches. Now, the signaling is transmitted through STPs, which are just routers. So when you think about a router on the internet, use the word STP on the Ss7 world. And then you would have to talk with database, which would basically say, for example, that when you try to connect to this number, you should be going maybe through a specialized network, for example, for voicemail, typically. So here we have the basic component. Every of these components, each of these components is called a network element. So basically, it's any kind of thing that would have an IP address on TCP/IP network. Now, with Ss7 network, we don't have IP address, we have point codes, or PCs. for example, when we'll be scanning DPCs, which are destination point codes. And each of these elements actually have one point code to which you can address. So this is a typical small Ss7 network. As you can see, there's different kind of link, and it's not at all like in TCP/IP. These links were TDM, that means basically time division multiplexing, so it was fixed bandwidth between two network elements. And each component would be connected all the time through two sets of links, so that if one breaks, the other can take over. So when you enter a Ss7 network, actually, it's not like TCP/IP where you just plug in a switch and you have a different ARP address and a different IP address, and then you start to communicate with any kind of IP address on the network. Here, if one network element doesn't know about you, it's impossible for you to actually be talking to this because you don't have even the physical connection to it. So here we are always excited about 0 days and hacking and getting the data out of the network. And when you talk to people in the telecom world, they don't care about it. Oh, we had some database stolen. Okay, that's tough. We'll have to send maybe 10,000 new SIM cards to people. But you're telling them that their network is going down for 1 minute, and then they go nuts. Because for them, 1 minute of downtime means millions of dollars that are evaporated. We're talking about big networks here. Each phone network, like a GSM network, is several hundred millions of dollars. Any kind of, let's say, BTS can be tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars. The BTS are the radio towers that you see everywhere. This is heavy money, and actually, right now, the big tendency is commodification of the whole Ss7 network, because this is too expensive. This is reliable, you rely on it for your daily life, but when you compare it with the TCP/IP world, there are things that are priced so high that it's not reasonable anymore. So lots of new companies are entering the domain, this telecom domain, in order to make things cheaper and then basically conquer a market. But this has a direct implication of making the phone network more and more open. And since it's getting more and more open, there's more entry points and there's more threads that are exposed. So as I said, we're basically going to learn again a new computer network stack. It's a bit like TCP/IP. If you look at the bottom level, you can see MTP, which has a message transfer part, or message transfer protocol. This is basically ARP and physical access to the medium, and the really low level equivalent of TCP/IP. And on top of that, you have SCCP and TCAP, which are basically a bit like TCP. They take care of providing connection between different network elements with addressing, and they take care of sessions, or what in telecom we call transactions. On top of that, you can see you can see different protocols which are basically MAP, which is the mostly used right now, which is a mobile application protocol. So it's basically the protocols that enables you to make cell phone calls, to have your calls following you between different BTS or BSCs. So that are the radio towers that you see everywhere, and the radio controller that are following you. And this is called, in our terminology, the handover. So here I'm going to talk mostly about Ss7. And Ss7 is a bit of a schizophrenia. This schizophrenia is coming from the fact that we separate the signaling completely from the voice trunks. So we'll be only thinking about how to inject things that talk about circuits, and we don't talk about the circuits. We don't talk about the trunks that are carrying the voice content, actually. In Ss7, the kind of addressing that you have between different network elements actually is not the same as the one you have for phone trunks that carry your voice. it's an old world. For example, on internet, when you send a packet, it's okay, it goes on the wire. When you don't do anything, there's nothing on the wire. Well, in telecom world, that doesn't exist. If you have nothing on the wire, you'll have fill-in signaling unit that will be going on all the time and fill just the nodes or the cells like in ATM. What we are being interested in is the messaging signaling unit. And you can see something interesting is that actually they have under a certain length. And actually the interesting part, the SIF, is under 272 characters. We're talking about a world where packet fragmentation and reassembly is not something they want to deal with. So that's why everything is in Ss7 messages is usually only one message. And when you have to have more data than 272 bytes, you need to use TCAP in order to do this transaction. So now, into this new world, as I told you, there's the routing label, which is basically dealing with destination point code, your destination address, originating point code, it's your source address, and then plenty of other information such as subsystem. So there's plenty of different ways to address things in a network. I'll be going through these, but mostly on the left-hand side, in the routing label, that's what we can use to do Ss7 scanning. Then on the right-hand side, that's the application data. That's where we want to actually do some hacking and inject some data that can create some problems somewhere else. Now, what is interesting is all these messages are not like in TCP IP. They can be duplicated. So let's say you send this packet to one STP, which is a router, and this router is going to forward it internally, let's say, to something called the HLR, the home location register, which holds all the SIM card secret keys and all the relationship between the SIM card identification, which is called an IMSI, and a phone number, for example. And you're going to do that through a pen test. You're going to try to do something bad on the HLR. Well, what is interesting is that when you send a packet to the HLR, there are many other equipment that get a copy of it. So one time I was doing a pen test and on a big live network, and we inject very carefully the attack packets. And you know, in pen test, usually there's progress meetings and progress reports where you give news about your pen test. And we're like to the customer, okay, we tried this and that and that. And our attack didn't work, so we are going to go on this and that attack. And the customer goes, oh, wait a second. On this, the number 3 attack that you did, can you exactly tell us what you did? And we're like, oh, we injected this kind of packet, and we did that, and basically it didn't work. He's like, yes. Well, actually, it did work, but not on the home location register, not on the HLR that you were targeting, but on the legal interception gateway that gets a copy of all Ss7 information. The legal interception gateway is the legal tap, or the legal eavesdropping. That's what cops and law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies use in order to control, manage, monitor, and listen to phone network conversations. SMS, real-time phone, basically a conversation. And I'm like, yeah, and so what? And like, well, you know, your attack did not crash or do anything on the HLR, but it completely crashed the LIG. Ooh, that meant that for some hours, the country had no capability to eavesdrop on criminal activities or hackers. Well, so they were pretty much annoyed about it. And guess what? When most of these LIG, depending on the country, are deployed, the telecom operator doesn't have the hand on the equipment. So there's the legal, the law enforcement agencies or the legal entity from the government that says, okay, on this date you'll have 10 guys from a company that will come to your data center to install the LIG. Please make sure they have entrance to your network and you can provision the SS7 routes to them. And okay, the company complies, and then there's 10 Israeli guys who show up and say, hi, we're from the legal interception gateway company, and we're going to install the system into your network. Please give us all your codes so that we can provision everything into your system. And I'm not joking, I've been to several places, it's exactly how it ends up, and the telecom operator doesn't have access to that LIG. So that may ring a bell to you for the guys who know about Athens Affair. Who knows about Athens Affair here? Ever heard about it? 100 officials, such as ministers and top companies, being eavesdropped on by backdoors inserted into Ss7 networking equipment in Athens, Greece. Ever heard about that? All right. There's one guy who probably heard about it and is dead. Basically, what happened is that there was a backdoor that was discovered by Ericsson in their switch, which was abusing the LIG mechanism in order to get copy of data. So typically when the cops want to listen on you, let's say, well, they want to listen on Federico, and they basically just use their phone number, their own phone, and they connect to the LIG, and they put a PIN code, 4-digit, very secure, and they enter then the phone number of Federico. And they say, okay, give me a copy of everything. And each time Federico is going to make a call, receive a call, the phone of the intelligence officer is going to ring, and is going to listen to the call, and basically he will have a copy of the whole conversation. He will receive his SMS, everything. Well, the backdoor in Greece enabled some people to receive exactly this kind of information for 100 top officials of Greece. And the only thing that you could know about it is that they received this call in a radius of 100 meters around the US embassy in the US on prepaid phone. But that's the most advanced conclusion they could come to, and there's no proof or whatever of US or whoever being involved. It was during, of course, the Olympics. Well, you can see that we are dealing here with simple packets that can do massive actions. Some other interesting part, like ISIP is one of the oldest part of Ss7, and it can do something like redirect every call from any number in the country to the police department to another number that happens to be a sex line. And that's one packet. So with very simple provisioning into the phone system, you can do terrible things. And the telecom operator are very touchy about giving you access to their Ss7 network because they are responsible by law, for example, of providing 911 access. So when you have this kind of situation, if they have loss of service, 911 is unavailable and stuff like that, they lose a lot of money and they can lose their license. So now that was very abstract, and what we really want here is how to deal with that, how to connect to it. So there's a great evolution is that the IETF said, okay, TCP/IP is great, let's make it possible to migrate Ss7 on top of TCP/IP. So basically what we have now is a different kind of network where on the left-hand side we still have the old Ss7 network, and then we have some signaling and media gateway that connects everything to the IP cloud. This is done thanks to SCTP, which is a protocol, which enables a reliable transfer. So here we have a few components here that will be all connected through something else than the regular TCP and UDP, because these guys are really concerned about having basically some kind of reliability. So when you think about the media gateway, you don't think about a regular PC. You think about 2 times a set of rack, typically from Huawei or from Alcatel or from Nokia Siemens Network or these people. And this is one logical element. So it's filling already a data center. Then you have another data center for the pair of it, because there's always pairs of it. And usually the kind of place it's happening is something very hidden, and you pass the first door, and then you see an armed guy who checks your ID and then checks that you're really expected on the phone with some central authorization office. So they tend to be very itchy about the security, physical security there. Then there's a media gateway controller and signaling gateways that basically handle, well, gives order to media gateways in order to say, okay, split this phone circuit there and this signaling circuit there. And then there's the SIGTRAN protocol. So SIGTRAN is based on SCTP I'll be presenting, and carries everything on adaptation layer. So you can see that as a kind of pillow between the Ss7 network, or the Ss7 protocols, and the TCP/IP protocols. So SCTP is IP protocol 0x82 or 132. It's something that doesn't like any kind of NAT, mainly because it has a few interesting capabilities. One capability is that by one single packet, you can say connect 192.168.1.1 and 100.92.168.1.2 to 10.001 and 10.002. So it's multi-home connection. In one packet, you'll be connecting from a set of IP address to a set of IP addresses. And what happens is that these can correspond to different computers. And you can dynamically inject new IPs and subtract old IPs. So it's a NAT nightmare. And if you remember of, for example, H248, who is familiar with H248? Nobody? Okay, it's an excellent NAT killer. If you want really to compromise a firewall, you just look if it supports H248. And if it does, that means that it's a bit like FTP when you can say, okay, connect back to that port, but not only for the destination or the client, depending on passive and active, but for both of them with something like 10 ports. So basically you can create 10 connections with one H248 connection. So think about it with SCTP. They said, okay, we are not going to do any kind of NAT because that's going to be even worse. Imagine you just need to insert one SCTP packet and say, okay, well, this is my new IP, please do some stuff for it. So another thing is that it's a 4-way handshake. So it's a bit different than TCP, which is a 3-way handshake. It enables multi-stream, so that basically you can say, oh, let's have, in TCP it's one STD in, one STD out, and some out-of-band packets. So that's 3 streams at most. Here we're speaking about something that can say, okay, let's have 10 stream in, 20 stream out. And basically you can use all of them. It's really well adapted for multi-threaded environment and this kind of thing. And you can have a TCP kind of mode and a UDP kind of mode, where you send streams or packets. So basically what we have in terms of scanning or connection is typically this. The 4-way handshake goes first with a packet that we'll call right now a packet type init. You'll see it's false a bit later. And then you get init ACK. Then you get cookie echo, which is anti-denial of service and anti-spoofing kind of technique, and then a cookie ACK. Typically, this is actually coming there, to be precise, so it's beautiful ASCII art straight from RFC 3960. In each SCTP packet, you actually get multiple chunks, and each of the chunks can be init and some other kind of thing. So it's a bit of a state machine nightmare. If you try to implement SCTP, you'll see that there's plenty of room for bugs, because you can inject a weird combination of chunks that will trigger a specific condition into the foreign state machine. How many of you remember of Linux SCTP kernel bug? Yeah, a few hands. Well, that's exactly what you can expect in the future with everything that is upper from SCTP, because it's so complex that it's easy to make a mistake. SCTP kernel bug was remote exploitable for years before it was actually fixed in Linux kernels. It's a hint for fuzzing if you didn't hear me. Okay, so what we'll pay attention here is actually init packets, init acts, of course, abort and shutdown acts. There's plenty of others. There are interesting packets which are the heartbeat packet. So basically when a SCTP link is not going to be good enough for the quality of service requirements, the connection drops and you go to another kind of multi-home association. So it's really something that is quite dynamic. And then we have the common header of the packet before the actual chunks, which are quite familiar. 65,000 ports in source and destination. Basically, that's like TCP. Okay, so I developed a little tool called Sctp Scan. It's supported to run on a few architectures. And the idea is to be able to do some scan like you do with Nmap. It does this kind of scanning, and it's interesting to see that there's very often some kind of nasty tricks that the telecom backbone is playing on us, because it requires, for example, when you connect to it, to have the same source port as the destination port. And very often, if you don't have that, you'll see nothing as open. So there's Nmap, who have now in the 5.0 version support for SCTP, but it lacks these little tricks that make it really reliable in order to scan for telecom backbone. SCTP Scan is included in Backtrack, and there's now a new version in GitHub, so you can download it from the internet. It's completely open source. Now, we have a difficulty here, is that typically each SIGTRAN or Ss7 node is going to be paired with another computer and configured for this other computer. So it's as if you'd have, let's say, IPsec tunnel that will only answer to another IP in order to establish the IPsec tunnel. And that's something that really prevents you, except if you do some kind of spoofing, to get into the Ss7 connection. So what we have typically is from the RFC that when you send an init packet, you shouldn't get any kind of answer. And when you have one that is open, well, you should get an acknowledge. It's really painful because you don't know if the packet is if the port is really closed, or if it's packet lost, if you need to retransmit or retransmit, or if you need delay, or if your packet was delayed. So it's a nightmare. Thanks to basically Linux kernel implementation, which is very nice, it sends us a board. So basically when you get to send packets, you can definitely know that the port is closed, because you basically get aborts. So you'll see that actually the scanning that we get is much better than in what was foreseen from the RFC. Typically, what we get in using SCTP Scan is very simple options. It's basically a bit like Nmap. You're just going to set up, your remote network, which can be one IP or which can be a set of IP, a network. And you can tell it to do only frequency scan. Here you see a few ports, and or auto port scan anything that is basically supporting the SCTP protocol. So when I created this scanner, first thing I did is like, wow, that scans the internet. And I'm like, this is not stealth. Well, let's see. Anyway, we can basically see if some people complain. And I start to scan like massively. And well, I fill up a few hundred megabits of bandwidth, and okay, wow, in a few actually weeks, I got the internet scan, and roughly nothing in terms of nobody was using it, at least externally, hopefully. And then I'm like, wow, but this must be noisy. And I continue to do it, and I give a few conferences about it. And then I'm like, okay, maybe I should speak about the scan. And then it was Black Hat in Amsterdam, and I start to speak about scanning the whole network. I'm like, wow, guess what? It's really funny. You know about DShield here, dshield.org? Who knows about it? Yeah, you guys? Okay, so the thing is, DShield is about picking up firewall logs and putting that in a nice web interface. So I was like, supposed to appear somewhere in there. I never appeared. So at Black Hat, I'm starting to explain that you're very furtive because IDS don't pick up your scans, firewall don't pick up your scans, your packets are just dropped and not logged. Nobody looks at SCTP actually. And then I start to see in the front row one guy with a SANS kind of jacket starting to write, really angry on his notepad, because basically he was certainly like reminding engineers to fix the problems. So it's a tricky protocol. When they implemented it first, they didn't do it right. So they used the Adler checksum. So when you're scanning with Nmap, you're going mostly to scan with only CRC, which is the current checksum. CRC replaced Adler after something like 1 year of implementation. Actually, you really want to scan with both of them, because in the world of telco, we are dealing with a lot of legacy. Legacy in the form of computer systems that were installed into the network, and if they take it out, there's a risk for downtime, so they don't touch it. So very often I go for pen test into some basically telecom company, and I'm like, wow, I've never seen that in years. And you see this beautiful VAX VMS system, which is actually delivering all the SMS messages. Well, okay. Okay, so then what really goes over SCTP, because this is only going to be our entry point to the phone network. It's a bit like finding the entry point of IPsec tunnel. And when you get this IPsec tunnel, well, you want to inject some stuff in there. So what you have, for example, is this is a kind of adaptation layer that will be transporting the top three protocol, TCAP, SCTP, and MTP3, on top of IP. And this is called M2PA. So M2PA role is to say something like, is the destination available? Yes, thanks, I'm going to forward some packet. And with that, we can start to do some scanning. Well, there's plenty of it. There's M2PA, M2UA, M3UA. So it's depending which layer you are going to transmit over the network. Once again, a lot of room for vulnerabilities. Because in there, you have only proprietary implementation. There's something called OpenSS7, but actually it's not really a working implementation. So all the big telecom network equipment provider and manufacturer are actually making their own stack. So each has these different fingerprint and can be also be full of vulnerabilities. I didn't say anything right. So one thing that here will be quite interesting is actually SUA, because SUA enables you to directly encapsulate very high-level messages. So you don't have to do a lot of encapsulation yourself into recreating this stack. So one thing that is interesting is that when you're doing a connection, actually, with a legitimate peer that is provisioned in the system, you're going to do this correct peering to the port 2905. And when you're going to connect to some port with the attacker system, well, usually you receive an abort. Very interestingly, some kind of negative scan, where when you connect to the 2905 from the attacker, you won't get any acknowledge. So that's a negative scan, because since it's not answering you, it means that it exists. So that's why then you need to do some tricky scanning. So right now, I'm working on the evolution of Sctp Scan, where actually we're doing a prediction of the peer's IP addresses by scanning wide ranges, by adding into the Sctp headers new multi-home addresses. So if the IP ID is going up faster with some kind of IP address into the header. That means that we are using a kind of IP address, or one IP address, that is the exact legitimate peer. And by dichotomy, we can reduce quickly the number of address down to the address that is a good one. Right? So now, what do we want? We want to play, right? So the thing is, you can only play really when you're dealing with your own network, because the operator are not even very happy about let you play and do research with their test network. And the reason why is that their test network is actually sometimes used for heavy deployment, test, and interoperability. When, for example, here Telefonica or any kind of other operator, I think we have Claro or this kind of operator, when they have a new partner, a new operator, they are going to spend something like 1 month to qualify one link. And there's lengthy procedure. It's not like in IP, oh yeah, it's working. And so the feeling of telecom people to people who are coming from IP networks is like, oh yeah, you're the TCP IP guys. Yeah, TCP IP, it's what I used to print on the network printer, right? So that's how they see TCP IP network. And the kind of research and playing is definitely not something of their liking. So we need actually open stacks and open basically networks. So we created the Ss7 bone. So maybe some of you are familiar with the IPv6. So at the beginning of IPv6, to interconnect the networks, there was something called the 6 bone. That is familiar? Any of you? Yeah. So basically, well, we said, okay, what we need to create is some kind of 6 bone, but for the Ss7 network. So the 7 bone is using a few different open source implementation and closed source implementation, sometime in the form of big, huge machine connected in Thailand or in France or in Hong Kong, and we connect that through VPN. So basically what is clearly open to, there's 3 kind of different network on 7 bone. There's a research network, there's our test network, and then there's some kind of production for customer network where we can do actual test with their test bed, so that we can do remote evaluation of the Ss7 product. OpenSS7 is nice to look at the source and see how it's done, but it's so big and it's not really practical. So I advise you actually not to spend too much time on it, but actually use freely available Intel stack, which is Dialogic originally, and it's supported on Linux, so Windows and Solaris. So get the binaries there, and basically you can have some working Ss7 implementation on your Linux box, which will only run for 10 hours. Well, after 10 hours, Control-C, reload, that's it. So you see that it's quite easy to use. That's definitely what we are using mainly to interconnect the big thing over the Ss7 bone. And there's the other implementation. So here what we have is a lot of closed development. And each of them did their own kind of development with their own specificities. So when you're using Wireshark, actually, you'll see that there's plenty of protocols going on the network that is definitely not recognized. So here, let's have a little look at, for example, a very nice decoded implementation of a SCTP packet, which is bearing some kind of well, it's called BICC, Bearer Independent Call Control. So that's the IAM message, which says that's the beginning of a phone conversation. And what you can see here, it's easily on Internet Protocol. It's protocol, okay, or X84, sorry, so it's 132. And then you have the SCTP coming from port 8000 to destination port 7000. And then you have some data, which is actually carrying M3 UA, so the protocol identifier, what we call the PID in the packet. Now, what is important is that here, very often, there's proprietary implementation that won't put the correct number in the PID. So your Wireshark won't know anything about it and won't decode it. So it really requires to look at actually the bytes inside the payload to really know what kind of protocol it is. I'll speak later about Nmap, which is used for 3G communication with the end element, the radio element. That's typically very unstandard. Then you got the, as I said, MTP3 that is carried over SCTP protocol. So if someone is following really attentively, are we speaking of M2PA, M2UA, M3UA? Okay. Since MTP3 is on top of it, it's M3UA. That's a kind of thing that you can do. It's really useful sometimes to see, well, I have a big chunk of data with MTP looking, so it must be M3UA. This is the kind of relationships you have to do. Wireshark won't do it for you. And then you have the actual interesting thing. So you can here see that it's a message to establish a phone conversation. So with this kind of message, you can do really funny things. For example, you can send a few packets like this, which will say, I want all the phone numbers, so I want all the phone of that city to ring once. Imagine the effect. You're getting all the fixed line that are going to ring once. It's scary. We tried it on just like building scale for an operator. It's like, it's like, and that's gone. It's, hello, Jack Bauer, are you here? Well, that's really freaky. So then what you get is really interesting things is actually, this is a called party number, so that's the actual phone number, well, that's the calling party number, so that's the phone number that you are calling from. Here you can see spoofing. There's interesting thing is that you can have interesting options such as closed user group. So here it's a non-closed user group. So typically the intelligence agencies and other governmental organizations are using that a lot in order to restrict this kind of network which can be reached or not. Then you have the user information such as typically location number, so that's the number you're calling, etc., etc. Here, yeah, nothing much. So you see that these are big protocols, so there's lots of space to inject, well, typical buffer overflows and things like that. And there's untypical things. For example, all these network elements are provisioned using something called MML. MML is like, it's called man-machine language, and it's used to give orders such as you have a new SIGTRAN peer, or you have a new Ss7 peer, which is at this IP address, etc., etc. Well, you know about SQL injection, right? So here, that's definitely the place where you can do MML injection. So sometimes you can have actually gateways or products that are sitting on top of HTTP, which will enable you to inject some kind of packet relating to delivering SMS, and you change actually the content of the packet by just injecting different things and having new commands in there, which can even be MML. So you can even, through a simple, not well-conceived gateway, you can have a way to reprogram network elements. That's big. So here we are going to use typical Ss7 attacks. So one I was telling you is eyes up. It's here you see the kind of packet that we were talking about. So destination point code, the destination address. Then what we have as originating point code. It's weird addressing. Sometimes it's not like 32-bit IPv4 kind of address. Sometimes it's 14-bit, depending on the network. Sometimes it's 21-bit. So it's really depending on the kind of implementation. So the kind of vendor that is in the phone network. And in the middle of this mess, you're like, okay, but how can the international network communicate between each other? So there's a network indicator that says two things. It says, well, three actually. It says basically if it's international or national. If it's international, it's a fixed way to represent the addresses. If it's national, then it's the internal mapping. And you'll see that actually there's a kind of translation, a bit like NAT, which is called GTT, which are going to translate the international SS7 message into national ones. And that's where the destination point code and origination point code will change. So here, let's say that we pretend a simple example. We're inside the same operator. So we'll have basically the guy picks up his phone and gets a dial tone, he sends the digits, and this will send IAM message with the actual digits that he punched on his phone. And this is going to be forwarded down to the last switch. So first is the first switch of the user, which splits voice and signaling. Then there's a router for SS7, which is the STP. Then there's another switch for the end user, and then basically there's a ring. So he picks up, and basically there's a connection that is established. Now, what if you send, like, let's say, to one precise prefix, 100,000 packets? Well, that's called capacity denial of service, because you're going to make all the switch provision a lot of trunk voice, so that basically no other trunk will be available for legitimate calls. So you can take out one city, say, okay, I'm going to just make Parana completely unreachable. And that's, well, something which represents not a lot of bandwidth from our perspective. Then you can do basically things such as, okay, the call is complete and you can actually do your communication, or you can actually release the call. So when you release the call, you send a rel packet that will actually disconnect the remote phone line. So here, what we have is selective DOS, where you can actually, well, terminate this connection. And if you remember well, in the time of the blue box, there were some very interesting capability of blue box where you could be able to inject signaling, like tones, that would say, connect me to this already established line and replace the originator with my, my communication. And basically, you could replace a modem and take some kind of modem communication in between. So there would be two modems connected, and you would replace one with your actual communication and attach your modem to it. That's typically the kind of packets that we're going on. Now, I started to speak about a bit complex things, such as the global title translation. Well, here, remember, with MTP, we were able to basically do destination point code scanning. So it's like IP scanning over TCP. Then, when you're using SCCP, you're actually indicating what kind of network and what kind of subsystem it is. So in terms of subsystem, typically there's system which hold, for example, all the SIM numbers of your phone networks. So basically your SIM contains a few information. One information is the phone, actually not the phone number, the identification of the SIM, it's called an IMSI, and, for example, your secret. And the secret is called KI. Everything there is stored into the home location register. It's a big database. Usually it's a, well, let's say between 5 and 10 Spark server, which are connected to a huge database. And this is only one SSN. So it's going to be a subsystem number 13, for example, is going to be connecting to HLR, to the home location register. So actually, you can do some kind of scanning depending on what message you send for what component and the number you'll end up with. Here, we're actually speaking about regular phone number. So there's an interesting thing, is that each of the elements inside the phone network not only have DPC, like destination point code, but they actually are addressable through phone numbers. I don't know if it happened to you, but you sometimes make a call and it's not working. And you hear something like Media Gateway Parana, or Home Location Register Recife, or something like that. And it's only a pre-recorded kind of disk that is given to you when you dial directly a wrong number, which is actually the number of this SS7 equipment. So, I don't know which time I have. Okay. Here what you can see is basically we had a translation between a point code that was internal and a point code that was external. So this was the external point code that you didn't set, and then there are internal point code. Sometimes you can have leaks because there's a replication of the point code in a sub-protocol that is not translated well when the packet is sent back. So basically you can evade and leak some data about the network mapping inside the operator from an external operator. Now, what it means is that external people can do stuff on the national phone network. And that really has an impact, for example, with knowing where you are. Here, what we are going to target is the Ss7 map message, so what deals with the phone, the mobile phone. And there's something which is called send routing info, SRI, that is a packet that will be sent by any home location register to know where a particular phone is located. Let's say I'm in France. I'm going to, or someone, for example, my girlfriend is in France and she wants to call me. So she's going to punch my French number, and then this is going to trigger a message, SRI, that is going to ask the home location register where Philippe is. And the home location register is going to answer, well, you should talk to a visitor location register, a VLR, which is located in Argentina, specifically in Buenos Aires. And it's the VLR number 12, let's say. Well, this VLR will actually point directly to MSC. The MSC is a mobile switching center, which is actually the place where your phone is being attached to. Not attached with a radio link, but attached with a logical link. So what happens is that with this message, you can receive something that is roughly serving 500,000 people. So that means that anybody on the planet can send this message and receive an identification number which carries the country and then is specifically attributed to one city. In the real world, the usage is for spam. They send tens of thousands of these messages in order to identify which numbers are working and then send spam for it. Now what happens is that I can perfectly use that in order to know where each phone that I'm interested in is located on the planet. And if I have a prior map of the different MSCs of any country, I can have a granularity down to the place inside the town where the person is. So basically, the French intelligence can know that I'm right now in Argentina and that I'm right now in Buenos Aires. And they can even know my location down to a few miles if they came here before and asked their own location for a known number and trying to move from place to place. So that's why you spend, as a taxpayer, a lot of money paying for some guys who travel to different countries and are just saying, oh, at that time I'm right now in Acapulco. It's nice. And there are some actual people from law enforcement agencies that are paid to do this, to do the prior mapping. And each country is not sharing this information. So each country is going to do that again. Crazy stuff. Oh, well, actually, this is not my French number, so they can't track this one, but they can track this one. How cheap is it? It is. Well, 150 euro, so we are talking about 750 pesos, to track 10,000 phone numbers. So it's relatively cheap. That means that you can basically assume that one is not moving a lot, so you can ask his position every hour. So it means a few days or weeks of tracking one person for only 150 euro. And you can have that into a centralized system. Well, that's what we are paying also as taxpayers. There's a system which are commercial system, which are exactly done to provide that to law enforcement agencies and intelligence agencies. So now, let's try to do something a bit more aggressive, like disconnecting someone. Well, the map the mobile application protocol for GSM is also used to update the location of the network element that I can talk to you. And basically, each time you're going to change from a cell, or actually from a set of cells, you have the cell is represented by a BTS, a base station. And this base station is connected to a base station controller, the BSC. And each time you're moving from one BSC to another, you're going to trigger, basically, a message that will update your position into the visitor location register. So if someone on the Ss7 network is updating this, it's important that you accept it, because there's no authentication keys or things like that between network operator. When you're into the international Ss7 network, you're accepted. So basically, if anybody is capable of injecting some Ss7 message that says, let's update the position of, let's say, one guy from Ukraine to Kazakhstan, well, basically, what will happen is that actually you'll be updated with this new location, and this new location will be an invalid one. But since you're targeting MSC, which is somewhere else, all the calls of your phone won't be redirected here, because actually your originating country is sending all your calls to Kazakhstan and not to Argentina. So that's something that is taking one packet, and then there's some remote equipment that will receive, well, invoke, so basically, which will receive some connection request. And the thing is like, well, you know the French? I don't know about this. I don't care. So I guess the Ss7 was designed by French people, and actually it was mostly designed by European people. Now we have new threats and new perimeters. Now, as I told you, Ss7 network is completely closed at the beginning. And you have now SMS providers and things like that. So the thing is gradually opening up. Well, it's opening up now much more than on the provider side. What we have is Femtocell. Who heard about Femtocell here before? Okay, a few guys. Okay, great. Femtocell is when you're in a remote location. For example, your home is in the countryside and you don't have coverage for your phone. So basically, you still want to receive calls. Well, the operator is going to sell you for really cheap some kind of equipment. So let's say you'll be able to have it for 500 pesos, $100. And this equipment is actually a GSM and 3G base station. So in the GSM, it's called a BTS. In 3G, it's called a Node B. Go figure. The thing is, they're even very often selling that to you for cheaper than it really costs. Get a few of them. When they really know about what I'm going to present, it won't be that cheap. The thing is, this hardware creates a radio cloud around your house where you can receive calls and connects through the internet through your ADSL line with the IPsec tunnel. Guess what? The Node Bs are typically ARM-based embedded platforms which talk IPsec and embed some kind of Ss7 dialect, which is called a Nmap, which is, of course, on top of SCTP and SIGTRAN. So what we have as a result here is typical carrier-grade Ss7 connectivity with actually a very insecure hardware. Well, when I looked at some products, some of the product, and specifically one, was for sure untested. And what we had was that basically you could get into the hardware by the JTAG, by the serial line. You could actually see multiple vulnerabilities in there. You could actually see that the connection to the provider would enable you also to connect to all the other Node Bs. And since they're also insecure, you could connect to theirs and do anything bad from their connection, steal their IPsec credentials, stuff like that. So here, we had so many requests that actually we started to develop a binary auditing vulnerability auditing tools. And that led to a new kind of product, which is definitely related only with binary tools, which is something you need because we are talking about huge binaries and things that you can't automate, you can't really audit by hand. So what we had is vulnerabilities in the binaries, a vulnerable 2.6 kernel, then the IPsec credentials that enable you to access all the other node Bs and to access directly the SIGTRAN controllers of the Ss7 network. So that's a huge like entry point to network operators' backbone, and they did some security stuff, but it's some new world and it's really difficult for them to really get it correctly done. Now, there's still other new parameters such as SIP. You're all familiar with SIP. So, interesting thing is that I spoke about all the different kind of entry point into the Ss7 network. Maybe I didn't speak so much about ISDN. ISDN is actually speaking a dialect of Ss7, which is a reduced version, Q something. Well, it's the number of the specification. The specification used to be closed source, now they are open. And what happened is that you can actually is working well too. So why not use SIP to carry everything? And okay, there was a need, so the protocol was created and the extension of the SIP headers was done, so that all the information that Ss7 is having, which is much more information than SIP was able to carry, well, can be encapsulated into the header and passed from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. So what does it mean? SIP is something that usually you don't need to be a defined peer to connect to, and you can inject UDP packets, and these UDP packets carry Ss7 packets. So encapsulated into the headers, there's actually Ss7 data. And then what you can do is actually insert much more easily the Ss7 packets than by going through the whole SIGTRAN protocol stack. So that's one way to get into the network. Does that ring a bell? Here, we're speaking again of in-band signaling. So you remember the old blue box thing where they went through a lot of pain to disconnect the signaling from the trunk? It's here again. We're back into the blue box days. Because here, you're basically having the same kind of communication. You have your RTP flow, your SIP flow, and that's something that you, as a user, are controlling. So you're once again in the band. That's some place where actually the operators have a lot of upcoming problems. And there's also other ways of getting into the phone system. If you don't want to get through all this Ss7 network, which is quite tiring to develop the tools with, and each of the network is using protocols which are going to be a bit specific, so you always need to tweak your stack. Well, mostly the telco are in this old thinking about the walled garden. So that means that they still think that their network is completely closed and anybody inside the network is going to be trusted. So once I was doing a pen test and I test for some stuff and I'm like, wow, this port 1998. Some of you guys know what is port 1998 in TCP? Rings a bell? Anyone? Have you ever heard about XOT, X25 over TCP? Well, that's something that Cisco has been using for a long time. And I asked the guy, well, I'm accessing some data over your X25 network. And the guy said, no, I have no X25 network. I go, right. And what's about this? Then I connect to it, and I connect through the XOT port, and the guy is like, oh, okay, that was all his BSC, so all the base station controller that were actually connected through X25 over TCP network. And the thing is, well, the vendor didn't tell the operator about it. He just implemented it that way, and okay, everything, like in the good old days, you connect to some systems that are embedded VxWorks and that don't even ask you for a password when you log in. So basically, you connect to a TCP port, you encapsulate X25, and you connect to some equipment that if you take them down by just typing halt, well, you have part of the network that is disappearing. And I'm talking about that right now. Well, there's also the database side. So sometimes you're like against HLR, and it's going to be very difficult to really speak the good SS7 terminology. Then you have actually an Oracle database that is used for all these HLR or intelligent networking stuff. And you can directly access and modify the database. So now we are talking about the typical problem for the telecom operators. Their real problem right now is someone at the customer service who just updated a few lines in the database which says that this prepaid card linked to my phone network, my phone number here, has 100 billion pesos in credit. And that's suddenly appearing on the phone network being highly used because some people on the street are reselling the prepaid card to a lot of people. So that's the fraud that they are really seeing. Typically for that, the phone doesn't rely on having a good database security. They prefer to pay $500,000 for a system called the Fraud Management System, or FMS, that is going to look for suspicious usage of a particular phone number. And that's how they detect fraud. That's a bad standard, with default passwords and really lame security level and horrible binaries hard-coded that you need to inspect, and basically really long pen test. There's another standard of operators that are really ultra secure, and I've seen a couple of them. They used MPLS backbone, on top of that VPN, on top of that they are actually using the best security provisioning mechanism for firewall, where you only have some kind of tubes between each endpoint. So that's something they provision not with a typical command line, but that they provision with systems. And that's some system where you're actually doing the pen test, and you're like, wow, I don't find anything. Then you start to move up to the application layer. And when you start to move up to the application layer, it's something like the same nightmare, where you have /log and /conf open for anybody to read with password logged into the log files, etc., etc. So it's really terrible. So we'll have to, I think, oh, how much time do I have? Yeah. Now. So there's a way to get secure. We are seeing that the telecom is actually merging its IP operation with the telecom operation. So that's better. That's improving, and people start to get the message that SS7 is again accessible. So there's increasing fraud. We are welcoming any kind of people who want to work with us on SCTP Scan or to connect to the Ss7 bone. And it's completely open source. That's part of research that we do, at least completely openly. And basically, well, the most important thing is getting the word out that this is accessible and to change basically the way you think about the Ss7 network. I would like to thank all the people from Telecom Security Task Force Research and K2 and also Skyper from THC. They are doing a great work in terms of all the research. Thank you very much to all of you, and the slides will be on the website after this talk.